The antique clock in the manor foyer had just chimed midnight. A chilling, almost suffocating silence lay over the sprawling estate. Elura Vance smoothed the lapel of her silk dressing gown, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously tidied the mahogany desk of her husband, Alastair. He had left it a scattered mess, the aftermath of what he claimed was an impromptu emergency business trip. Alastair had kissed her goodbye barely 2 hours ago, his voice tight with false urgency, explaining that a critical issue had erupted at the company's new West Coast branch, requiring him to catch the first red-eye flight out. Elura, a woman whose love and trust had been unwavering through their 5 years of marriage, had simply helped him pack his travel bag without question. Alastair was, after all, the perfect husband, driven, unfailingly charming, and seemingly incapable of deception. As Elura reached to switch off the tall, bronze desk lamp, her hand brushed against a dark object half hidden beneath a stack of thick financial reports. Her blood ran cold the instant she recognized the familiar texture of the rich leather. It was Alastair's custom-made wallet. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, his driver's license, his primary platinum credit card, and a substantial roll of $100 bills were all tucked neatly in place. Panic, sharp and immediate, seized her chest. How could Alastair have left for the airport for a long, urgent trip without his wallet? He wouldn't be able to get through security without his ID. He would be stranded, frustrated, perhaps even missing his critical flight. Elura rushed to the master bedroom, snatching her phone off the nightstand. She called Alastair repeatedly. The ringtone sounded on and on, a monotonous alarm in the dead silence of the house. He didn't answer. She imagined him already in the car, maybe stuck in a tunnel or on a call with a colleague, his phone set to silent. Her anxiety spiked. The clock on her phone read 12:35 a.m. Alastair's flight was scheduled for 2:15 a.m. There was just enough time if she left immediately. They lived roughly 40 minutes from O'Hare International, provided the express lanes were clear. Elura hated driving at night. The glare from oncoming lights often gave her blinding headaches. And the family chauffeur, Mr. Henderson, was off duty until morning. Without a second thought, driven by a fear that her husband might be delayed or in trouble because of her own inaction, she opened her rideshare app. With hands that shook uncontrollably, she typed in the destination, International Departures Drop-Off. She had to get that wallet to him. She would not let a simple oversight ruin his crucial business deal. After what felt like an eternity, the app connected her with a driver named Mr. Grant. His vehicle was listed as a dark gray Cadillac, and the map showed he was only 4 minutes away from their private, secured subdivision. Elura quickly threw on a thick, long winter coat over her pajamas and clutched the wallet to her chest, securing it deep inside her purse. She felt as though she wasn't just carrying leather and plastic, but the entire foundation of Alastair's career and her own peace of mind. 5 minutes later, the sleek gray sedan pulled up silently to the gate. Elura hurried out, locked the front door, and slid into the back seat. The car was immaculate, filled with a neutral, slightly metallic scent. In the front, behind the steering wheel, sat a man in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and steel gray hair at his temples. He looked at Elura briefly through the rearview mirror. His gaze was piercing, yet his expression remained unreadable. Elura offered a polite, nervous apology for the late-night request and explained she needed to reach the international terminal urgently. Mr. Grant simply nodded once, a terse movement, and smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving the world of luxury homes behind. A heavy, oppressive silence immediately settled in the car. The radio was off. There was no gentle jazz, no attempt at small talk, just the hum of the engine and the muted rush of the tires on the cold asphalt. The darkness outside mirrored the growing dread in Elura's soul. She could feel her heartbeat accelerating, a panicked drum against the silence. The sedan advanced along the highway, which was nearly deserted. Elura's eyes were glued to her phone screen, hoping for a return call from Alastair, but the screen remained stubbornly black. She had already sent the text, but the lack of a read receipt now felt less like bad signal and more like deliberate avoidance. A sudden wave of intense loneliness washed over her. In this dark car, rushing toward an airport, she felt utterly isolated from the world. She leaned her head back against the leather seat, trying to control her ragged breathing. She repeated to herself that she was overreacting, that Grant was just a professional driver, and that the silence was simply due to the late hour. But her intuition, that small, insistent voice women learn to ignore for the sake of peace, began screaming. Alara noticed the driver's behavior again. Grant was watching the rearview mirror too frequently, his eyes flicking between her and the road behind them. Every few minutes, their eyes would meet in the silver reflection, a cold, intense connection that felt less like a security check and more like surveillance. This insistence made her deeply uncomfortable. She hugged her purse tighter, the wallet within feeling heavy and dangerous. Stories of rideshare crimes, dismissed as social media scaremongering during the day, now felt terrifyingly real. 40 minutes crawled by. When the intense, cold lights of O'Hare International finally came into view, Alara let out a deep sigh, a shudder of relief passing through her body. It was 1:15 a.m. She had made it. She pictured Alistair's relieved face, his quick thanks, and the familiar, comforting feeling of having averted a small disaster. Mr. Grant drove into the airport complex. Instead of stopping at the usual brightly lit main terminal drop-off, which was still busy with late travelers, he continued moving slowly. He drove past the crowds, past the glow, heading toward the very end of the passenger drop-off lane. This last section was almost completely dark, with several streetlights burnt out, and seemed utterly abandoned. Alara frowned, the previous relief instantly dissolving into a fresh wave of panic. "Sir, could you stop at the main entrance, please?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He did not respond. The car stopped abruptly next to a huge, brutalist concrete pillar, a silent barrier separating the public area from a fenced service road. There was no one in sight. No porters, no police, no other passengers, just the cutting wind and the deep early morning gloom. Alara's internal alarms blared. Her hands shot toward the door handle and pulled hard. Locked. She tried the handle on the opposite side. Locked. The doors were held shut by the central control near the driver's seat. A consuming, scorching panic seized her chest. She pounded on the window, screaming Grant's name, demanding he open the door, but the sound barely traveled. She was trapped. Grant remained absolutely still, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white, his face pale and slick with cold sweat, his eyes fixed on the dark sidewalk immediately outside her back door. Alara dissolved into pleas and sobs. "Please, I'll give you money, take the wallet. Just let me go." It was then he spoke, his voice deep, strained, and absolute, cutting through her hysteria. "You are not getting out here, Alara, I forbid it. You must believe me for your life, trust me." The sound of him using her name made her blood run cold. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. He turned his head slightly, and the panic on his face was genuine, but his eyes were hard with resolve. "In 5 minutes you will understand everything. Until then, you must not move." The seconds dragged. Alara watched the digital clock on the dash. 1 minute passed. 2. The silence in the car was crushing, thick with terror. Grant stared intently into the side mirror, monitoring something invisible and terrifying lurking in the darkness outside. As the dashboard clock crawled toward the 5th minute, a sudden, blinding chaos erupted. From both directions, 3 unmarked police cruisers, moving with aggressive speed, appeared out of the darkness. Their sirens began to wail immediately, and the flashing red and blue lights violently illuminated the desolate corner of the terminal, reflecting harshly off the Cadillac's windows. They rapidly surrounded Grant's car, effectively blocking any movement. Alara gasped, letting out a stifled scream. For a hopeful, terrifying moment, she thought they had arrived to rescue her from a kidnapping. Several large men, dressed in tactical gear and vests, quickly exited the cruisers, rifles held ready. They moved with a chilling, professional precision that suggested they were not dealing with a simple traffic stop. Alara instinctively ducked, covering her head, fearing she was about to be caught in the crossfire. Loud, amplified commands were shouted over a bullhorn, ordering someone to surrender immediately. But to her confusion, the officers did not rush the Cadillac. They sprinted past their vehicle, rounding the massive concrete pillar right by Alara's door, and converged on a deep, hidden shadow. They pounced, tackling a dark, heavily bundled silhouette that had been lurking in the exact spot Alara would have stepped out had she managed to open the door. Alara slowly raised her head, watching the scene unfold through the tinted window. The officers violently pinned the man, a large figure in a dark hooded jacket pulled low to the ground. He struggled with desperate fury, but he was quickly overwhelmed. They twisted his arms behind his back, securing the handcuffs. As the suspect was subdued, something small fluttered from his pocket and landed on the cold pavement. A long, thin folding knife and a wadded, pale cloth. An officer, moving with trained care, put on thick rubber gloves, carefully retrieved the cloth and sealed it inside a plastic evidence bag. Even through the sealed car windows, Alara caught the sharp, sickeningly sweet chemical smell. It hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Chloroform. She clutched her throat, the realization slamming into her that rag was meant for her. She was seconds away from being dragged unconscious into the darkness. At that moment, a senior-looking detective approached the driver's side, opened the door for Grant from the outside, and spoke respectfully. He informed Grant that the asset was safe and the target had been secured. Grant nodded, his rigid posture finally easing. He released a shuddering sigh of relief and pressed the button that deactivated the central lock. The soft click was the sweetest sound Alara had ever heard, the sound of her life being returned to her. Still shaking, Alara turned to him. "What is happening? Who are you, really?" she demanded, confusion warring with the terror in her voice. "Why didn't they arrest you? Why are you protecting me?" Grant finally turned fully toward her, and the intensity in his eyes softened into genuine, caring warmth. He looked at her not as a client but with profound familiarity. "My name is Jonathan Grant, Alara," he said, his voice quiet and firm. "And before I became a rideshare driver, I was the head of your father's personal security detail for nearly 20 years. Alara stared, stunned. The name felt distantly familiar, a strong, protective presence from her childhood that had vanished years ago. Grant explained that before her father, Robert Vance, passed away, he had made Grant swear a secret oath to never stop watching her, to protect her from the predators he knew would circle the family fortune. "Tonight, Alara," Grant continued, his voice heavy, "I received a coded alert. The operation to eliminate you was launched. The man they just cuffed was a professional hitman. You were the bait." Her mouth went dry. "Bait, but why? Who would want to?" Grant didn't let her finish. He raised his hand and pointed across the dark tarmac, past the police cars, up toward the second-floor windows of the brightly lit terminal. The massive glass wall offered a perfect view of the high-end check-in counters. "Look, Alara, see for yourself." Alara's gaze followed Grant's pointed finger, climbing past the harsh airport lighting until it fixed on the illuminated interior of the departure lounge. Her breath hitched. The image that came into focus was sickeningly clear, a tableau of betrayal played out beneath the cold fluorescence of the terminal. There stood Alistair. He was visibly agitated, his face blotched red, stripped of the charming, cool composure he always maintained. He wasn't waiting for a flight, he was pacing like a caged animal who had just missed a meal. In a sudden burst of pure, childish rage, he hurled his phone against the marble floor. And she saw who was with him. Victoria Hayes, Alara's best friend, her confidant, the woman who had helped her choose her wedding dress and whom she saw weekly for coffee and comfort. Victoria was dressed in a sleek, shimmering emerald dress, hardly the attire for a comforting friend. She clung to Alistair's arm, her body pressed close to his side, her voice likely a soft, urgent murmur as she tried to calm his fury. At their feet lay two brand-new, large luggage sets, designer bags stuffed for an extensive international trip, not the small, overnight bag Alistair claimed to have packed for his urgent business up north. Alistair instinctively tightened his arm around Victoria's waist, pulling her into a possessive, intimate embrace that left no room for doubt. They looked down together, their expressions a synchronized mixture of burning hatred and desperate frustration, aimed directly at the flashing lights of the police cruisers below, as if silently cursing the unexpected operation that had ruined their perfect escape. In that single, agonizing instant, Alara's world didn't just crack, it imploded. The tears that came now were not driven by fear of death, but by the agonizing, sharp pain of utter obliteration. The man she had idolized, the perfect husband, and the friend she trusted more than anyone else in the world had been orchestrating her murder. The business trip was a fantasy. The forgotten wallet was not an accident. It was a premeditated, cruel fishing lure, intended to ensure she left the safety of her home and drove straight into the waiting chloroform rag and the arms of a paid assassin. They needed her gone for good, and tonight was supposed to be the final, irreversible act. Grant allowed her to lean against the cold car door and weep, the sobs racking her body until they turned into raw, harsh gasps. The pain was so intense it felt physical, like a hand ripping her heart from her chest. When her crying finally subsided into a stunned silence, Grant gently started the car. He drove away from the terminal, leaving the flashing lights and the grotesque sight of her betrayal behind. He merged back onto the empty highway, crossing a bridge from the world of blissful, ignorant marriage into a world of cold, harsh reality. "They think they failed," Grant said quietly, his eyes focused on the road. "They saw the police presence and assumed their hitman was compromised by a random patrol. They do not know you are alive, and they certainly do not know you saw them." He instructed Alara to pull Alistair's wallet out of her purse again. With hands still trembling violently, she obeyed. ID, credit cards, cash all present. But as she separated the thick wad of bills, she felt a stiffness between them. A small piece of paper folded multiple times. It wasn't a receipt. It was a one-way international plane ticket for Alistair Vance and Victoria Hayes, scheduled for a flight leaving 2 hours later from the terminal where they were standing. Behind that ticket, taped securely to the back, was another document that made Alara's blood turn to ice. It was a recent life insurance policy, meticulously processed in Alara's name, insuring her life for a sum equivalent to millions of dollars. The sole beneficiary listed was Alistair Vance. The final, horrifying pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The financial cards and ID in the forgotten wallet were useless to Alistair. He already possessed the documents that truly mattered, the 2 passports and the tickets for his new life with Victoria. The wallet was merely the instrument to draw Alara into the kill zone. If the kidnapping succeeded, Alara would vanish without a trace. Alistair would later report her missing, wait the appropriate time, collect the massive insurance payout, and start his new, debt-free life with his mistress in a foreign country. Alara crushed the documents in her fist, the expensive paper crinkling under the force of her rage. The searing pain of betrayal was swiftly replaced by a cold, metallic fury, a feeling she had never experienced before. The blind, devoted love she had nurtured for Alistair over half a decade was instantly incinerated. In its place was a sharp, focused desire for retribution. She looked at her reflection in the dark car window. The meek, trusting wife who had rushed out into the night was gone. A new, harder light shone in her eyes. Grant, observing this seismic change in her demeanor through the rearview mirror, nodded slowly. He understood that Alara was no longer a victim seeking comfort, but a survivor preparing for war. "They believe the police ruined their kidnapping attempt," Grant reiterated, his voice calm. "They think you're safely at home, still oblivious, still the naive wife they left behind. That ignorance is our biggest weapon, Alara. They will try again, but they will be more cautious." He strongly advised her to return home and pretend that absolutely nothing had happened, that she had found the wallet casually and never left the house. They needed time to secure her assets, time to build an undeniable case, and time to turn her husband's confidence into his biggest liability. The ride back to the estate felt dramatically different from the urgent trip to the airport. The highway, empty at 2 in the morning, offered Alara the space to collect her shattered thoughts. She wiped away the residue of her tears, fixed her disheveled hair, and forced her face into a blank, sweet expression. She had to become the greatest actress of her life, not for an audience, but for survival. As they neared her gated community, Grant cut the headlights, gliding silently to a stop a few hundred feet from the mansion gate to avoid alerting the sleeping security guard. Before she got out, Grant opened the center console. He handed her a tiny, innocuous device, no larger than a button. It was a high-tech listening bug and transmitter. "This is crucial, Alara," he whispered. "You must hide this where Alistair spends significant time or keeps his personal effects, somewhere he talks or works daily, but somewhere utterly undetectable. We need to know their next move, and we need their conspiracy recorded." Alara clenched the miniature microphone in her fist, its cold metal a promise of power. She stepped out of the car and moved toward her luxurious home, no longer as its owner but as a spy infiltrating enemy territory. She opened the lock with painstaking care to prevent any telltale creaks. The interior of the house, usually a haven of warmth and comfort, now felt sterile and oppressive, every expensive piece of furniture a monument to a lie. She locked the door silently behind her, ensuring no detail would alert Alistair upon his inevitable return. Her first stop was the downstairs powder room. She splashed cold water repeatedly on her face, trying to scrub away the lingering traces of panic and grief. Staring into the mirror, she saw the change. The fear was replaced by a rigid, controlled focus. She was no longer her father's helpless legacy, she was a woman ready to fight. Feeling sufficiently composed, Alara began to stage the scene. She took Alistair's wallet to the living room, carefully considering the most plausible location for him to find it. It couldn't be too obvious, suggesting she deliberately placed it, nor too hidden, implying she had searched the entire house. After a moment of deliberate thought, she chose the leather sofa in the den. She wedged the wallet half hidden deep within the crack between the back cushion and the armrest, exactly where it might have slipped from his tuxedo pocket had he been distracted while sitting down to check his cufflinks or put on his shoes earlier that night. It was a perfect, accidental placement. Next, she quickly hid the spy microphone. She considered his coat, but he might change it. His car, too risky. Her eyes fell on his favorite Italian leather executive briefcase, a gift from her on their second anniversary. He was obsessive about that briefcase. It went with him everywhere, even on quick trips. Quietly, Alara went to the coat closet and retrieved the briefcase. She located a tiny, almost invisible interior pocket designed for coins or keys. She opened the zipper, pushed the miniature device into the deepest corner, and secured it firmly with her finger, ensuring it was invisible from any casual inspection. She zipped the pocket shut just as she heard the sound of a car engine approaching the house. A familiar sound, accompanied by the muffled crunch of tires on gravel. She dropped the briefcase and hurried back to the sofa. She picked up a fashion magazine, turned on the nearby floor lamp, and set the television volume to a whisper-quiet level. She then settled back, carefully mimicking the deep, regular breathing of someone who had fallen asleep mid-read. The time was 3:05 a.m. The front door key turned abruptly in the lock, followed by the sound of the door crashing open far too forcefully for a man returning from a routine business trip. Alistair entered, panting, his tie loosened, his expensive jacket crumpled. His face was slick with sweat, not the fatigue of traffic, but the residue of panic and failed criminality. He shouted Alara's name, his voice ragged. Alara stirred dramatically, letting the magazine fall to the carpet with a soft thud. She sat up with a convincing, exaggerated yawn, blinking several times as if completely disoriented. "Alistair, what are you doing back? I thought you'd be halfway to Seattle by now," she asked, her voice thick with sleep and perfectly innocent confusion. Alistair froze, seeing her alive and serene on the sofa. The shock of finding her calm and at home clearly registered as relief, quickly followed by confusion. He regained his composure instantly and launched into his well-rehearsed lies. With a voice filled with manufactured distress, he claimed that he had realized he lost his wallet while on the highway to the airport. "I panicked, Alara. I couldn't fly without my ID. I decided to turn back, but then there was a massive pileup, a multi-car accident, and traffic was completely gridlocked. That's why I'm so late." Alara listened with a worried face, nodding sympathetically, though internally her blood was on the verge of boiling. She knew exactly where he had been and the sinister reason he was so late. She stood, placed a tender hand on his arm, and confessed, "Oh, darling, I've been so worried because you wouldn't answer your phone. I couldn't reach you." With natural, practiced sweetness, she pointed to the sofa. "When I woke up a little while ago, I noticed something hard in the seat cushion. Look." Alistair followed the direction of her hand. The edge of his recognizable leather wallet was just visible, wedged between the cushions. His tense features dissolved into immense, genuine relief. He practically threw himself onto the sofa, grabbing the wallet and checking its contents rapidly. ID, cash, cards, all there. He had no idea that Alara had already photographed the ticket and the insurance policy inside Grant's car to secure the vital evidence. Alistair pulled her into a tight, almost desperate hug, smothering her with thanks and calling her his good luck charm. In that embrace, Alara caught something else, a faint, expensive perfume, certainly not her own scent. It was Victoria's signature fragrance. Alara's stomach churned, but she didn't pull away. She returned the hug gently. "Go take a hot shower, my love," she murmured. "You look exhausted from the traffic. Everything is fine now." Alistair readily accepted her advice and headed upstairs toward the master bedroom. He seemed entirely convinced that fate, in the form of an unfortunate police operation, had merely delayed his business trip and his murderous plot rather than completely exposing it. As soon as he disappeared from her sight, Alara's demeanor changed. The sweet, sleepy mask vanished, replaced by the rigid determination she had cultivated in Grant's car. She quietly rushed to the base of the stairs and checked her phone. She had connected the small earpiece provided by Grant and opened the associated app. The tiny microphone in the briefcase was active, transmitting sound. She heard the water running loudly in the en-suite bathroom. Alistair was in the shower. This was her window. Alara slipped back into the kitchen, the one room far enough from the master bathroom to afford her a minute of privacy. She sat at the marble counter, placed the phone down, and listened. She didn't have to wait long. She heard the sound of a zipper being opened, Alistair retrieving the burner phone he kept hidden within the briefcase. Then, the rhythmic tapping of a number being dialed. The moment a female voice answered on the other end, Alara felt a searing chill race down her spine. It was Victoria. The conversation that followed was nothing like a clandestine, romantic exchange. It was frantic, volatile, and filled with mutual recrimination. "You idiot, you were supposed to be boarding." "What the hell happened with Grant's car?" Victoria's voice, usually honeyed and soft, was shrill with panic. Alistair's response was a harsh, low curse. "The cops, Vic, an unforeseen, massive operation right next to the drop-off. They had the whole area shut down. I couldn't risk getting out. I had to drive around until I could ditch the backup car and sneak back. It's a complete catastrophe." Victoria reminded him, her voice tightening with dread. "The deadline, Alistair, we need the money. The loan shark is demanding the entire $200,000 tomorrow. If you don't pay, they'll come for you at the office, at home. They'll ruin your reputation, or worse, they'll drag you out of here in cuffs." Alara listened, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. Alistair's gambling addiction, which he always hid behind sudden business setbacks, was real, and his debt was monumental. The murder wasn't about love for Victoria, it was purely about financial desperation and greed. Alistair panicked. I know, but the main plan is shot, the hitman is gone. We can't just try again tomorrow, we need a new exit strategy fast." Victoria, though nervous, seemed to be the more pragmatic criminal. She lowered her voice conspiratorially, and Alara had to strain to hear the words coming through the tiny device. "Remember the alternative, Alistair. The Harrington warehouse, the one Robert Vance left to Alara. She told me once there were rumors. Old family gold bars, maybe untaxed assets, deeds to undeveloped land. She's the only one who knows the code to that old safe." "The safe, it's just a rumor, Victoria. It's our only chance now. We failed the insurance policy. We need liquidity. Get that code, Alistair. Soothe her, pressure her, whatever it takes. Play the devoted husband one more night, then we take everything and run." Hearing this vicious plan, their casual disregard for her life and the predatory focus on her father's legacy, was the final, steel-cold push Alara needed. She ended the recording, her hands shaking not from fear but from righteous anger. Without wasting a second, she quietly retreated to her small personal study, carrying her phone. She needed to contact Grant immediately. Alara called Grant, keeping her voice low, the tremor of controlled fury still audible. Grant assured her he was still monitoring the area and would be at a designated meeting spot near their community entrance within 15 minutes. She moved quickly to the small, discreet safe hidden behind a framed painting in the master bedroom closet. Alistair was still showering. The sound of running water provided excellent cover. She did not retrieve the legendary Harrington safe code. That was a secret she would carry to her grave. but she pulled out several crucial documents that proved her sole ownership of the family assets and the warehouse. 15 minutes later, she was back inside the dark gray Cadillac. She looked pale, but her eyes, usually soft and blue, burned with an unflinching resolve. She quickly filled Grant in on the conversation she had intercepted, the exact amount of the gambling debt, the loan shark deadline, and their desperate pivot to the rumored warehouse gold. "The warehouse is key," Grant confirmed grimly. "They think it's their fallback. They need that code, which means Alistair will be completely devoted to you today. He will be manipulative, charming, perhaps even overly affectionate. He has to get that code before the loan sharks corner him." Alara looked down at her hands, the rage stabilizing into a cold, strategic patience. "He will find a very compliant wife waiting for him, Grant, but he won't find the code, he will find a trap." Grant nodded, pleased. "We need to act on 3 fronts immediately. First, protect the assets. We must officially contest any recent documents he may have forged. We'll start with the power of attorney." Alara then remembered the second paper she had seen tucked in the wallet that night. She reached into her bag and handed Grant a detailed photograph of the forged document, the one transferring ownership of the family manor and a valuable downtown property to Alistair. "He slipped this into a stack of routine papers a few weeks ago," she whispered. "I remember signing a stack, distracted." "This is excellent evidence," Grant said, his tone professional. "We'll file a motion to freeze all transactions related to those properties immediately on the grounds of suspected forgery. That will stop him from selling them out from under you, even if the kidnapping failed." "Second," Alara continued, her voice firm, taking charge of her fate, "the insurance policy. Can we void it?" "We can't void it without raising massive red flags that Alistair will spot instantly," Grant cautioned. "We need to let him think it's live, a prize he can still get. But we can flag it internally with trusted contacts. If anything accidental happens to you in the near future, the payout will be stalled indefinitely while an immediate investigation is launched. We make the prize worthless without him knowing." "And third," Alara said, her lips curving into a slow, cold smile, "we address the loan sharks." "We can't pay his debt," Grant pointed out. "Of course not," Alara replied, her eyes distant. "But Alistair needs to feel the pressure. He needs to know that his time is running out, that his criminal world is closing in. It will push him to make mistakes and escalate his desperation for the safe code." Grant drove her back to the main gates. "I will have a forensic team working on the forgery documentation and the recording from the briefcase today. You, Alara, must prepare for the most dangerous day of your life. You are going home to the enemy." Alara got out, the cold air hitting her face. She smoothed her coat and walked back toward the mansion. She wasn't just walking into a house anymore. She was entering a cage, ready to bait the predator within. Alara re-entered the house just as dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky with pale, weak light. She was exhausted, yet wired with an adrenaline-fueled focus. She slipped the small earpiece back into her ear, connecting it to the recording app, ensuring the briefcase bug was still transmitting clearly. She heard the water stop upstairs. Alistair was finished with his shower. Quickly, Alara went to the kitchen and began preparing coffee, filling the house with the comforting, domestic aroma of fresh grounds, the smell of a life Alistair still believed was intact. A few minutes later, Alistair descended the stairs. He was wearing a fresh suit, immaculately dressed for a man who claimed to have just endured a traumatic night of traffic and frustration. He looked composed, though his eyes still held a restless, hungry anxiety. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist in a tight embrace that made Alara physically recoil internally. She forced herself to lean into the contact, returning the affection with a weary, sweet smile. The contrast between his manufactured warmth and the cold perfume of Victoria still clinging to his suit jacket was nauseating. "You are my angel, Alara," he murmured, kissing her neck. The words were a tool, a means to an end. "I was so worried last night, thinking I'd lost that wallet for good. Thank God you found it." "I told you, darling, I woke up and there it was, right beside me," she lied smoothly, turning to face him and handing him his coffee cup. "You must have been so exhausted from the jam. Why don't you take the day off?" "I wish I could," Alistair sighed dramatically, running a hand through his hair. But that issue up north is critical. I'm going to have to make some urgent calls today. But you, my love, you look like you need a distraction. He then began to deploy the charm offensive Victoria had suggested. I feel terrible about last night, he continued, holding her hands. To make it up to you, I've canceled my lunch today. How about we spend the afternoon together? Maybe go to the family warehouse? You haven't been there in years, and I keep meaning to check on those old, dusty records your father left, to make sure everything is properly logged for tax purposes. Alara's heart pounded. The pivot had begun. He wasn't even subtle. He was rushing directly to the warehouse under the pretense of tax purposes. She smiled, a perfect picture of a compliant wife, but added a slight touch of hesitant innocence to her voice. Oh, the old warehouse. The one with the heavy steel door in the basement? It always gave me the creeps, Alistair. I haven't been down there since Dad passed. Exactly, my dear, that's why we need to go together. It would ease my mind. He squeezed her hands, looking directly into her eyes, searching for compliance. Do you still remember the code for that old safe? The one he always kept in that storage room, just for inventory purposes, of course. Alara pretended to think, tapping a finger against her chin. I think I might. It was something easy connected to Dad's birthday, wasn't it? But you know how my memory is. Alistair's face brightened with triumph. He had his entry point. I'm sure you do. If we go together, maybe you can remind me. It would save me hours of searching through his paperwork. Come on, my love, for me? Alara leaned in, kissing him sweetly on the cheek. Of course, Alistair, I'd love to go. Let me just take a few minutes to organize myself. Why don't you head to the study and start your urgent calls? I'll meet you in an hour. Alistair's relief was palpable. He hugged her quickly, the hunger in his eyes overriding any suspicion. He rushed off to the study, eager to put his plan into motion. Alara watched him go. She knew he wasn't rushing to call his office. He was rushing to call Victoria to boast about how easily he was manipulating his naive wife into giving up the code. She quietly activated the recording feature on her phone, ensuring every word he spoke in the study right next to his briefcase would be captured. The trap was set. Now she just needed to wait for him to spring it. As Alistair disappeared into the study, Alara walked quickly toward the front door. She pulled out her phone and quietly called Grant. He took the bait, she confirmed, her voice low and efficient. He's rushing to the study now to call Victoria. He wants to go to the warehouse this afternoon to check the tax records and get the safe code. We need to move the timeline up. Understood, Grant replied instantly. I'm forwarding the forged power of attorney to the courthouse contacts now. The motion to freeze the properties will be filed within the hour before the banks open. Alistair won't be able to sell anything. Good, now the loan sharks, Alara instructed. We need to light a fire under him. He needs to feel the pressure of the deadline today. Grant hesitated. Alara, contacting organized crime is extremely dangerous. I have contacts, but I need him desperate, Grant. Desperate men are sloppy, she cut in. Make sure he knows his time is up. Send a brief, anonymous message to his burner phone, something cryptic that only they would understand. Make him sweat. Grant agreed, his tone hardening with renewed focus. Consider it done. I'll also be using my police contacts to run a background check on Victoria Hayes. If she's involved in Alistair's gambling debt, there might be other leverage. Alara hung up and retreated to the kitchen, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. Through the earpiece, she heard Alistair dial Victoria. It worked. She bought it. Alistair hissed, his voice trembling with excitement and relief. She's worried about the house's taxes, so I told her we need to go to the warehouse this afternoon to check the old records. She thinks she remembers the code. We're in, Vic, we're finally in. Victoria's voice crackled through the earpiece. You'd better be right, Alistair. I just got a terrifying message, a warning. They know the debt is overdue. They're coming for the money today. You have hours, not days. Alistair's bravado immediately crumbled. What? That's impossible. I didn't tell anyone. His voice spiraled into pure panic. I need that code, Victoria. We need to leave tonight? The conversation devolved into desperate planning. Alistair was frantic, completely blindsided by the sudden pressure. He finalized the plan with Victoria. They would meet near the warehouse after Alistair retrieved the code from Alara, and then they would vanish. The call ended. Alara heard the sound of Alistair frantically pacing in the study. She knew her husband was cornered. His carefully constructed mask of control was gone. Alara waited another 20 minutes, allowing the panic to fully set in. Then she walked into the study carrying 2 freshly brewed cups of her best Earl Grey tea. "Ready, my love?" she asked softly, handing him the tea. Alistair jumped, startled. He quickly hid the burner phone deep inside the briefcase. His anxiety was visible. He was jumpy, his smile forced and too wide. "Yes, yes, I am, my dear," he stammered, grabbing his keys. "Let's go solve this little tax problem at the warehouse right now." As they drove toward the old industrial district where her father's warehouse stood, Alistair was unnervingly affectionate, praising Alara's intelligence and devotion, laying the groundwork for her to casually reveal the safe combination. Alara played along, reminiscing about her father, allowing Alistair to believe he was securing her trust. They arrived at the massive, dilapidated stone warehouse. The air smelled of concrete and rust. Alistair quickly unlocked the heavy main door and led Alara inside, carrying his precious leather briefcase, the one containing the spy microphone. He led her to a small, dusty back office. In the corner, behind some stacked barrels, was the heavy, century-old steel safe. Alistair looked at her, his eyes shining with desperate hunger. "All right, my love, the moment of truth. Do you remember the code for this old thing?" Alara smiled, but this smile was real, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. She walked up to the safe. "Yes, Alistair," she said, her voice clear and strong, without a hint of the confusion or terror he expected. "I remember the code perfectly." She placed her fingers on the dial, looking him dead in the eye, and whispered, "It's the day my father made Grant swear he'd protect me from you." Alistair's jaw dropped. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. Before he could utter a single word, the back door of the small office burst open. It wasn't Victoria. It was 2 large, imposing men in black suits, the debt collectors for the loan shark, who Grant had cleverly directed there using the same cryptic message he sent to Alistair. They ignored Alara completely, their focus entirely on the sweaty, panicked figure of Alistair Vance. "Mr. Vance," one of them stated, his voice a low threat, "it seems you missed your payment deadline. We're here to collect." Alistair stared from Alara, whose face was now a mask of pure, triumphant vengeance, to the 2 looming thugs. The realization that he had been entirely exposed, manipulated, and trapped by his own wife hit him with devastating force. He was utterly ruined, financially and criminally, and he was completely alone. The safe remained locked. Alara stepped back, her eyes unwavering. "I don't know this man, gentlemen," she said, the devoted wife one last time. "He's just the man who tried to murder me for my insurance money."